When you say the word masculinity, yeah, what do you actually mean?
That's kind of the question.
When you say masculinity, I think testicles.
I love being a man. I love other men.
Being a man's good. I don't know any different, so.
This is the third episode in our series on modern masculinity. If you haven't watched the first two episodes, there are links on the screen now so that you can do so. This episode is a little bit different, but the idea is still the same. It's about getting different voices contributing to the conversation about modern masculinity. So I emailed a bunch of different men, relatively well-known guys, and I asked them if they would come and talk to me, and these were the guys who responded. It's quite a broad mix. They're all from different ages and different backgrounds, and I asked them the same questions from whether aggression in men is natural or taught by society to what their relationships with their dads are like. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. How do you think your relationship with your dad has affected the man that you are today?
What?
I don't know. Sorry, let me think about it a second.
It's okay.
My dad used to growl at me, man. I remember as a kid, he used to come down to, I'd be like this tall, yeah, and he'd come down to my level and go, I'd shit myself. I would shit myself and run upstairs.
You know what they say, when you get older, you start to look more like your dad? So every day I look at the mirror, even with all this makeup and all these dreads, I still see my dad. Like I see my dad.
Even if I never met my dad in my life and you met both of us, you'd be like, wow, this is mad. He's just like him, he's just like him. He was famous in the end, had the deepest swaggers, the ring from there to there, the Kangol hat with the fifth Kangol hat, that's what I used to wear.
My dad was an ice cream and we grew up with Italians, and he didn't drink and he was a very jolly little man. Che bella cosa, all the time, that sort of stuff. It's my dad. And that sometimes brings tears via Italian opera, because I remember my dad and happy times like that. He really loved music.
I grew up in a very, very male setup. My father was the headmaster of a boys' public school. The ethos around him was all about men and boys.
So my mother died when I was quite young. I was 2 and my sister was 4, I think. He had lost the love of his life and he had 2 kids. And so I looked at him growing up, and I guess I saw this man who was struggling, I think. Seeing the weaknesses in my father helped me look at when I have similar weaknesses in myself and ask myself, how do I approach those? How do I approach those struggles in a different way? Not that I don't think that he tried to in a way that was good or valid for him, but my relationship with my dad, I think, is founded primarily on the idea that he tried to create a good life for us in very difficult circumstances for himself. And so my relationship with my dad just provides me with so many questions that I don't have the answer to, but I will spend my whole life thinking about.
My mum and dad separated when I was 3, but they was always there for me and my brother. My dad lives around the corner from me, so I never felt as if I was abandoned or I didn't have a dad. He was always there. But my mum, when she was younger, never went down that kind of bad boy route. She was very straightforward, whereas my dad was a little bit like this. So I got both worlds. I think he was just mixing with the wrong crowd as growing up. So then when he saw me doing that, he pulled me up on it because he knew what that could entail.
My dad used to go arseholes a lot. Silly arse. Now, silly arse could be very affectionate, or it could be literally silly arse, wrong. I don't know how much he's affected me.
Were you close with him growing up?
Ish. My family, we were all close, but not too touchy-feely, I suppose. Some people find that funny. There's something wrong with us.
I guess I probably grew up, resenting a few things about my dad and hiding a few things from my dad. And so now that I can be open about those things, it's still a work in progress. It's definitely not all the way there. But, things like him knowing that I'm a gay man And it's interesting, like, what that does for you, you know, like at least like getting over getting over the line with your parents, or getting past a certain bit of like secrecy, because like having secrets from your parents can be such a juvenile thing, especially when you grow up and you want to just move on with your life and live your truth. So when you let go of that, it's actually quite freeing.
I didn't have a close relationship with him. He was, you know, he was an authority. And I think it developed in me a bit of an anti-establishment view of life. I don't think I wanted to identify myself as different to him. I just didn't think that he had anything to tell me about who I wanted to be.
So I think it's obvious that for many of us, our first idea of what masculinity is all about comes from our relationship to our dad. But we did a call out and we got all of these responses, and many of them asked us to address the question of role models, especially for men. So I asked all of our contributors who their role models were growing up. When you was growing up,
Yeah.
did you have any particular role model who are men?
Yeah, I have role models, but you know what it is, yeah? I've never ever looked at a role model and said, that's the life I want to live.
I've always wanted to be Beckham. Just from a kid, like he's a baller, like good-looking fella. He's got his missus who's a 10-10, he's got a nice family, he's got a family, I mean, he's got a nice house, got cars, whatever. So on the outside looking in, he looks like the guy, you know what I mean?
I remember one teacher in my in the choir school. I think he offered me a softer view of what we could all be, a more sensitive view. There was still a lot of sexual abuse in male boarding schools, and you were always wary. With this particular guy, you never felt any threat of that.
The strong male role models in my life were my grandfathers. They both expressed a different idea of what it meant to be a man, and neither of those things were formed on the idea of aggression. They both emigrated to this country in quite a tumultuous time, but they found spaces for themselves. Yeah, they felt like good men to me, and I just always tried to hold them in my head.
I think possibly my first manager was somewhat his cousin, who was called Johnny Walker. He was so mad, we shout like that, he's still fucking hell, he was just, and he made me laugh a lot. And my manager, Colin Johnson, had this kind of Cockney bravado thing. And a guy called Jack Linton was very, very funny, and probably stuff like that, which again isn't particularly good, but it served me well rather than people realise that there's a wimp hiding in here somewhat, or a coward, a lot of people would say. You aren't encouraged to be forgiving, you aren't any of that stuff. You're just kind of a fucking man are you. Get in there with rugby. Hack him down, boy. So when we're talking about role models for kids, we have to be careful that in 40 years' time you're not telling them, no, that's wrong now. We don't believe that anymore. We don't do that.
You know, the only real representation of like being a man in South London as a black man is, you know, extremely hypermasculine, extremely like, there's no room for vulnerability. You have to be strong, you have to be hard. And I think there was no one to show me that it was okay if I didn't want to fight, if I didn't want to be angry.
Throughout my career, I've covered loads of different stories, but I find myself repeatedly drawn back to try and understand the big questions around terrorism or knife crime, for example. And I always ask myself why it is that in these extreme cases of violence that it's very often men involved. And so I asked our contributors if they think that aggression in men is something that is natural, or if they think it's something that is taught by society. Do you reckon a guy's aggression is like a natural thing, or do you think it's a thing that they're taught?
I don't think it's natural. It's not natural.
But we are pushed to do something. Ever since I can be in primary school, it was something about not being manly enough, not being tough enough, not being all that macho stuff.
If someone hurts you and then everything was fine, they could hurt you again. So when they hurt you, you approach the situation, you show them, I'm not someone that you can hurt. And it's to do with just this thing about holding it up. Do you know what I mean? Someone could have dissed you, someone could have nicked something from your house, and then you find out who it was. Now it's up to you to like put it on them. It's a way of protecting.
When I was really young, I walked to school and I'd seen this kid, and I must have smiled like that. He went to school, and a day or so later, it seemed like, I saw him again, I smiled again. He came out and hit me round the head so hard with his plimsoll. He must have gone to his dad and said something on the lines that somebody had smiled at or laughed at him. So his dad, which a lot of guys tend to do with their kids, go up and hit him as hard as you can. There was two kids both shitting themselves being in that position, but his dad had made him get me the following day. They come at you with such a fucking aggressive angle that I found that so intimidating that I learnt to try and be that. And it wasn't until I was about 30 that people used to say they were frightened of me. I see you tit. How can you be frightened of him? But it showed that it worked.
I do think a certain amount of aggression is inherent in men, and I don't think that's something that necessarily is an excuse or that can't be pushed against. But I think we also live in a society that kind of validates that aggression. You see that slightly heartbreaking thing of people's personalities shifting more towards, this is what I think the world wants of me. That capacity for compassion, for empathy, that sort of gets knocked out of them a little bit.
Men experience something in life which moves them that way. What that something is can be anything from neglect to abuse to bullying to inducing some sense of inferiority which they feel they need to, get back at.
There's boys in my year who are dead. There's boys in my year who are married. There's boys in my year who are in prison. So I could have done any of them. I just luckily went down a route that I never even knew was possible. I was in the right place, right time.
I'd just like to say a really big thank you to all of these guys for coming and speaking to me about their personal experiences. We will be returning to their stories later on in the series. But in the next episode, I'm going to go to South London to speak to some of the men there about being a young man in 2019. I feel like it's really, really important because very often we speak on behalf of 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. We've got all these concerns around them, but they're very often not given the platform to speak for themselves. If you want to stay up to date with everything we're doing in this series, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe.
I think being a man is taking responsibilities, having integrity. If you don't do the right thing when no one's around, you're not a man, you're still a boy, you're not mature.